So again, my name's Adam Donaldson, National Community Service Program Specialist at the Rhode Island Department of Education. And we're having a webinar about our RISE Americorps grant program. Everyone should see on the screen our published request for proposals. One of the things that we are looking to do today is just talk about the appendix that no one has read called the Americorps terms and conditions for these grants. We think of our grantees as part of a team. We have monthly check-ins and additional training and activities throughout the year. And you really become part of our Americorps network. And there are quite a few things in the term and conditions that specifically speak to that, and also speak to the requirements that the federal program has. So we're going to dive in, and we're literally going to walk through this document. I'm going to kind of read through some of the highlights, and hopefully it'll be engaging because you're caring so much about applying for this program. But in our RFP itself, the document that you've all read, hopefully, and if not, it's at www.serverrhodeisland.com/Americorps grants, our request for proposals. There is a table of contents, and the very last item in that table of contents is Appendix A, the Americorps grant terms and conditions. This is contractual language about the relationship you'll have with the Rhode Island Department of Education as a subgrantee in this Americorps program. And I encourage you to read some of the initial content. It identifies, for example, that I will be your project officer and the person who helps you with this grant. It also recognizes that a fiscal officer will oversee the payment process and that sort of thing. The questions there. So already it's important information that an awardee should have. I want to highlight that it does talk about how payment is made for fixed grants versus cost reimbursement grants, which are the two different types that you may be applying for. You will see that it specifically says that RIDE, that's the Rhode Island Department of Education, will pay a fixed grant subrecipient on a monthly basis the prorated amount based on the amount of hours served. And at the end of the project period, the Rhode Island Department of Education calculates the final amount of the award based on the number of successfully completed terms of service. So there's been a lot during the RFP process and the webinars we've had conversations about the difference between fixed grants and cost reimbursement grants, and the way that they are paid out on a monthly basis is indicated in the terms and conditions here officially. There's also a clause, this has never happened, right? But if the federal government suddenly did not provide funding to the state for the Americorps program, the grant would have to close. We are relying on Congress to do its work and pass appropriations bills as they did most recently and continue to provide that funding to the state for this program. Our portion of the program is 100% federal funds from the Americorps agency that we are passing on to you. Just to note that prepayment of grant funds before the grant period starts, which is July 1, any costs or requests for funding are not permissible. There's no prepayment allowed. So apologize for that, but that is how we manage the grants here. Because it's terms and conditions, there is standard legal language in here about your ability to cancel your grant if you wish, and have rationale for doing that. And also if something happens, the Department of Education can also terminate the grant, right, with a conversation and a period of 30 days to conclude activities. But this does not come into play very often, but you will see that kind of information there. One thing to recognize also here is record keeping. So this is a federal award. It's also an award with the state, and there's an expectation that financial records around the data that you collect to show the results of your work, and also records pertaining to the Americorps members themselves, what we commonly call an Americorps member file. The application that they submitted to you, their timesheets, and other relevant documents. There's expectation that you will keep those records for a period of time according to your own record retention policies, but it's usually 5 to 7 years. And also that those records will be made available to representatives of the Rhode Island Department of Education if they need to monitor them related to the grant. If there are any questions or things that you want me to clarify as I scroll through some of these more general terms and conditions, please interrupt me by using the chat, which I am opening up on another monitor so I can see it clearly now. I'm going to scroll past a lot of the legal terminology to talk about some of the things that are more programmatic. There is general language in the terms and conditions that the state applies to all grants that you will find there about equal employment opportunity, being a drug-free workplace, not having tobacco smoke present. So you can find that information there. Sorry if I'm making you dizzy with my scrolling. It's really section 2 of the terms and conditions that are specific to the Americorps program that I think it's important that you take time to review with your team before you really say, yes, we want to accept these funds for sure. The first article refers you actually to a document from the federal program itself, the Americorps state and national terms and conditions that apply to all Americorps programs. And we're going to take a look at that document in just a second, but I'm going to scroll past it for a minute here and talk about some of the Rhode Island specific information that we have. One is this expectation of publicity. So we are very explicit that the name Americorps and ServeRI should be used liberally in any press release, any official documents that you're using related to the program. And in particular, when administering an Americorps program, we have an expectation that the Americorps member themselves is visibly identifiable in their community. What that can mean most commonly is Americorps members who wear t-shirts or polos, jackets or name badges, some type of uniform part that has the Americorps logo on it. We most frequently every year do provide one t-shirt in our opening day ceremony to all the Americorps members, and have also provided in recent times, sweatshirts or fleece vests and hats and additional things to augment what our subgrantees are doing in terms of uniform parts. It can also mean, for example, if an Americorps member is frequently in a classroom or a community room where they do their service, that there's a sign on the wall with acknowledging that Americorps service is taking place there. But it's really beneficial to everyone in our network if Americorps is being consistently promoted. It will help you communicate what is happening with this program, set you up to recruit more partners, investors, and Americorps members themselves if you are mindful of opportunities for publicity. We have a specific line in here where you would say the super awesome Americorps program is supported by Server I in the Rhode Island Department of Education, just to get very granular on what's in here. Article 5 talks about program directors meetings. So you, of course, will have individuals at your organization that have their own titles, but in general, we identify the language program director to be the primary contact of the Americorps grant, the individual who regularly is involved in managing the grant or managing the Americorps members themselves. And we convene program directors frequently. We will have a Start Strong summer training series starting in June. We have adapted to the new norm of doing virtual meetings and trying to provide, again, recordings and that sort of thing. These are really about setting up systems to be prepared to manage the Americorps program, to understand how to enroll an Americorps member officially into service through the eGrants system, how to do criminal history checks. It's really important information, especially for new programs, and a good refresher for all of our subgrantees. We also hold monthly program director meetings. Our current pattern is to have them from 9 to approximately 11 a.m. And we've already, in these terms and conditions, put in the dates to hold for those program director meetings, which hopefully you can see on the screen there. You should also know that we love and enjoy and are excited to have every year an Americorps Opening Day event. This is an event where service participants may or may not have started in your program, but those who are in service come together collectively across the state to take a pledge that Americorps members have used since the program started in 1994, that they are committing to a term of service. We have adapted the location of this activity from sometimes being at the state capitol to Open Park in Providence, etc. This coming year, we're really intending on Saturday, November 4th, to potentially hold our pledge ceremony and to involve actual physical community service altogether with anyone also who wants to register to volunteer and make it kind of a big celebration of service. So that would be something that you would be invited to. Similarly, Martin Luther King Jr. has a holiday every year, right, in January, and we celebrate the legacy and really the entire civil rights movement through that holiday. But Americorps has had a special relationship with the King family and their intention that the day be celebrated through volunteer service. And in Rhode Island, we again try and honor that commitment by bringing Americorps members together from across the state with an opportunity to serve. This past year, we did a food program where we packaged, I'm forgetting now how many thousands of meals, 4,000 meals in a few hours altogether as Americorps members to distribute to families in province. And we will again do some activity. You will be able to design your own activity for your Americorps members to participate in if that's your preference, or join in our collective action. So I just wanted to highlight all of those things there that are in the terms and conditions and kind of some of the additional expectations that we have for our grantees. We also have expectations about what the Americorps member will experience. So you will manage them, select them, recruit them, and manage them, train them as you see fit under your program and according to the application you've submitted. But there are some things that are mandatory from our perspective. One of those is we want every Americorps member to receive some training on what we often call Americorps 101, but a little bit about the history of Americorps, how they relate to other Americorps programs in the state of Rhode Island, and in particular, that there are some rules called prohibited activities that they are not allowed to participate in. We have our own template for that training. We also have we currently have access to an online service, so you will not be alone in trying to implement this expectation, but just wanted to highlight that one. We also want to know that our Americorps members are receiving some support from programs for their life after Americorps, that transition as they exit the program, tailored to what they're interested in, whether that be in a career or education. I mentioned before that we want Americorps members to attend our opening day event, our Martin Luther King holiday. We also have an annual activity called Justice Talks, which is a series of civic reflection training sessions that we will announce the dates for as soon as possible in the early fall, but they will take place between January and March, where we mix Americorps members up, generally speaking, from different programs, and they come together to reflect on conversations about justice, equity, and inclusion as it relates to their common service experience. One of the other expectations that we have in the terms and conditions is related to disaster response. So this has not come into play in many years, even with the COVID pandemic being a disaster, we did not enact this. But Americorps fundamentally is about serving the state. And so we do have a clause in here that if the governor asked, they can call on Americorps members to participate in emergency relief services. And there are some limitations. We wouldn't do anything that you or the Americorps member wouldn't agree on, but Americorps members can be invited to temporarily leave their specific service role that you've designed for them and help out in the case of an extreme emergency. Think of, in our context, a hurricane would be the sort of classic example. So the last time this took place was when there was significant flooding in southern Rhode Island. And again, it's voluntary, but just want to explain that because it is in the terms and conditions. We also are very specific about the reporting that we will ask you to do after you receive the grant. There are both progress reports, programmatic reports, and then there's financial reports. So the program reports are what we call GPRs, grant progress reports. We ask for a mid-year and end of year report, and we give everyone the same deadlines, due February 1st, and then at the end of the year, October 1st. And these are reporting on the results of your activities. We will provide you with the specific template asking for a few narrative responses and information about how many Americorps members are enrolled and how many, related to your performance measures, what progress have you made in succeeding in your plans. Then the financial reports. So you're going to be asked to submit monthly reports in order to receive grant payment. And we aggregate these reports so to meet our obligation to report to the federal government. You do not need to complete federal financial reports, but you do need to submit to us in the format we'll provide you monthly expense reports so that we are prepared as an agency, as a state, to respond to that federal financial report requirement. Also in April, we will ask our programs to, if they haven't already communicated this in some way, to look at their progress in spending the funds that have been awarded to them and to determine if it is known to them that there will be funds that are unexpended during that grant year. This is a report that we again aggregate and send to Americorps, and those funds can be, depending on the grant system and cycles of grants, they can be repurposed to re-reward to you for the following year, or to award to perhaps a new program. So we need to understand if there are resources that aren't going to be used so that we can make sure to squeeze every dollar we can to the benefit of the Rhode Island community. At some point, after 2 years, your grant will come to a close, and we would provide you with grant closure instructions that ask you to certify the end of activities, the retention of documents, and that you have no more financial reports to request grant payment. And we will do that. So that's another reporting thing that is in there, 60 days at the end of your grant. And I know this is very detailed, but I think that it's worth having the big picture of taking on this federal and state grant and the expectations that come with it. We will also have an annual compliance review or visit, as the language is here. We have adapted this process to be more of a virtual visit at this time, and we'll see if the world allows us to return to physically visiting the offices of our subgrantees. But we will, on an annual basis, in the spring, in a more detailed monitoring process that we would inform you about after you become a grantee. But there is an annual process where we come and do a look at Americorps member files and have an interview both with staff and with the Americorps members who have been serving with you to monitor for compliance with Americorps rules, and also to hopefully help improve the program overall. All right, I told you this would be fun. So Article 10 is National Service Criminal History Checks. Every Americorps member needs to undergo a criminal history check process, specifically the way that Americorps requires it. So we are going to introduce you to some vendors, one called TrueScreen and one called FieldPrint, and ask you to create accounts with these online systems and to follow a specific set of instructions so that the individuals that you want to place into Americorps service can first have a national fingerprint background check, a state of service, that being Rhode Island, background check. If they are not Rhode Islanders but have applied from Connecticut, for example, to come and serve in Rhode Island, we have to do also a Connecticut background check. And we also do a public search of the National Sex Offender public website. We do this through TrueScreen and FieldPrint. And so that is something that you'll need to be prepared to take on. And again, part of the pre-award process is to make sure that you have access to all the information about how to carry out that responsibility with both written instructions and also presentations, so that you'll be well informed, and then also supported by both my colleague Amanda and I. There are some finer details in here as well that'll be of interest to your fiscal folks. One of them is understanding that Americorps members are not employees, and so the Department of Labor and Training does not recognize them. They are not, if they leave an Americorps position, they're not able to request unemployment insurance. And so we do not want you to, we don't want you to pay into unemployment or Rhode Island's temporary disability insurance, and these are not allowable costs. Just so you know. I'm trying to think. You might, there's some details in here, like paid family leave, right? So because again, Americorps members are not employees, the Rhode Island law about paid family leave doesn't apply. You can design a schedule for them that mirrors paid family leave, but again, they're not employees, so it's not relevant. Now, after you get a grant, you'll probably want to make some changes. Rather than reading through all of this, I'll just say that anything is possible with a conversation, and that's what this explains in the terms and conditions. There are things you might want to change, like how much you pay the Americorps members in living allowance, or you might have staffing changes, or you might need to exit a member. There's just a lot of times where we ask you to communicate with us, and those are detailed in the terms and conditions. And we also provide you with more information and training about that afterwards. And that includes budget changes. The state agency really with almost very few exceptions. And certainly here in the documentation, it says that we won't consider budget changes after February 1st, except in rare circumstances. But we provide a process where you can request a budget modification after your application is awarded. There's some details in the terms and conditions that modify the statement I just made, which I invite you to read. And that is going to be, you think that's it. But I want to switch over. You remember that I started by saying at the very front of the terms and conditions is the information about the Americorps documents, terms and conditions. So there is a link to additional information about the Americorps program itself. Sometimes folks have questions about living allowance, taxes in particular, and how that works, whether or not Americorps members, once they start in service, can change to another program or change their commitment. And all the answers to these questions come from the rules that you find in these terms and conditions. I do think I want to recommend that you review this document. I don't think I want to go through it in quite the same scrolling effect that I've been doing so far, because I feel that I will have lost your attention. But it is very clear here. You know, for example, we've provided information in the RFP about who is eligible to serve in Americorps. And the reason why we know that is because it's in this document, the terms and conditions, that they must be a US citizen or lawful permanent resident. They must be 17 years of age at the commencement of service. They must have a high school diploma or be working on one. And the affiliation with the Americorps identity is also re-emphasized in these terms and conditions. One of the things that Americorps will require is that you advertise your open Americorps positions on their website platform, which is actually done through eGrants, the same system that you have applied for the Americorps grants, and appears at my Americorps, Americorps.gov. It's, you know, for lack of a better explanation, it's a job board, but you can search there all across the country to see who is recruiting Americorps members, and how they describe those positions. And so one of the things we will provide information and training on is how do you create that position description so that you can get it on the My Americorps portal. It also details in here that you cannot charge applicants who are applying to become Americorps members any application fees. You can't ask them to pay for criminal history checks unless you plan to reimburse them. And that you have a process of recruiting and selecting Americorps members, but until they're actually enrolled through the eGrants system, their Americorps experience has not officially started. We really need to make sure that you have someone prepared to learn about the Americorps enrollment process and how that is done. Again, with Amanda and I here to support you with training and technical assistance. I'll just highlight this reference to reasonable accommodation that appears in the terms and condition. It's a very small paragraph with outsized importance. It mentions that your program and activities must be accessible to persons with disabilities, and applicants should provide reasonable, should be offered reasonable accommodations in order to serve with you. We actually have additional, this is an important topic to us. We have additional resources on having an inclusive program, and it's part of our tradition and culture to welcome individuals with disabilities into service. Trying to think if there's anything super important. Every Americorps member has a written member service agreement. We will provide you with a template for developing a contract called the member service agreement that is signed by you and the Americorps member. That includes their position description, their expectation of how many service hours they're to complete, the end date of when their service experience ends with you, and a lot of information about your expectations for their conduct. You can add additional information to that agreement, but the elements here that you see on the screen are all required components, part of the template in the training that we will provide. So every Americorps member has a written contract called the member service agreement between the program, and that's part of the application process. The terms and conditions list the prohibited activities that we have made reference to in the RFP and in previous trainings. If there are any questions about that, including the census, more of an issue a couple of years ago, and election and polling. Americorps members may not provide services for election or polling locations or in support of such activities. Previous to the coronavirus pandemic, the Rhode Island Americorps program, Server I, really did not permit teleservice. Americorps members were expected to do direct service in the community, and with very limited time, if they were, home, they were not in service. So that certainly has been a radical shift in thinking recently. There is some rules around teleservice, and we ask our grantees to have, if that's going to be part of the program model, to work with us to develop a written teleservice policy that outlines how the Americorps member is supervised or accountable while they're doing that teleservice. That includes service they might be doing, or training that you might be providing them through remote systems. Again, because previously that wasn't even permitted, but that's been a big shift and something that you'll want to maybe consider. It's also listed in here an expectation that every Americorps member experience a performance review. If they are serving a full year, that includes a midterm and end of term performance review. If a shorter period of time, it may just be an end of term. And there are 3 specific points that the performance review must include. They're there on the screen. But otherwise, you may have your own thoughts, your own staffing model about how you would normally conduct a performance review. We will also be able to provide you with templates from other Americorps programs. But we want the Americorps member to have that experience, this experience that employee should have also, right? Where their supervisor is giving them feedback and they have the opportunity to reflect and deepen their skill and also give feedback to you at the program. Americorps members complete timesheets and track their hours of service. This is in the terms and conditions. We will also provide, more than likely, anyway, we will provide also an online time tracking system. And if you receive a fixed grant, we will really want you to use our own online time tracking system unless you request a waiver of us and make a good case that you have a different system that's adequate. It will speed up the payment process if the timekeeping system that we provide and can access is the same timekeeping system that you're using with your Americorps members. But whether that's a paper timesheet or an online system, Americorps members need to record when they're in service, when they're in training, and if they're participating in any fundraising activities. All right, I'm going to stop there. The terms and conditions talk more about the fact that Americorps members enroll in specific terms or slots, and there are ways that you can change that. Your grant comes with a certain amount of slots, and you can change them and convert them if you speak to us at the State Commission, and you can and have the individual serve for a shorter period of time if there's a certain circumstance. So one of the things that might happen is you intended to start someone in service on August 28th, but you didn't recruit, you recruited 6 out of 7 folks. And so you have this one unfilled spot. But then in November, you're able to start that person. But in November, there won't be enough time left in the year for the Americorps member to complete a full term of service. So you ask us to change the type of service slot from a 1,700-hour commitment to a 900-hour commitment, for example. And so that the rules and the way that happens are detailed in the terms and conditions here, but also in the training and information that we'll provide you after the fact. So that's all in this. Yeah, Americorps members can also exit, and the exit process is explained in the terms and conditions, and also how the expectations around living allowance. That living allowance is not a wage. It is a stipended amount of money that is paid not on an hourly basis, but on a weekly or bi-weekly basis in equal amounts for all the Americorps members who are doing similar work, similar service. And the types of taxes and things that must be paid for living allowance are detailed in the terms and conditions, including FICA and income taxes. Members do have W-4s, so you can see that this is fairly detailed and worth reviewing with this yourself or the staff who might be responsible for some of these procedures within your agency. It also describes the requirements for healthcare coverage, whether or not folks are eligible for childcare benefits from the Americorps program. What happens if they're in the armed services and they need to respond to the National Guard? So you can see that there is a lot in here, and I really want everyone to take the time to review the terms and conditions. That was really the message that I wanted to deliver today. I think I'm going to allow ourselves to stop there and just have a chat and see what folks picked up from that, what is maybe something they've already seen in the terms and conditions and they want to ask me a question about it.